Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I'm your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, and my special guest today is Dr. Alyssa Parten. She got her PhD at the University of North Alabama. I'll let you guys guess what city that's in because I did not know. She's a clinical assistant professor of kinesiology at the University of Alabama. Her research centers on resistance training in female physiology, with a focus on strategies to enhance female exercise performance and how resistance training may impact female long-term health. She's currently leading projects examining the role of resistance training in supporting women through the menopause transition and in populations with metabolic dysfunction. Other ongoing projects include evaluating strength and conditioning strategies such as post-activation performance enhancement, PAPE or PAPE, effectiveness in females, and the validity of estimated 1RM calculations in female populations. And then there's another long acronym you got here. Dr. Parten leads and I'm going to say it's FemPower.
Yeah, that's how we say it.
It's FEMPWR. I was like, wow, six letters here. She leads the research team, Female Exercise and Metabolism for Performance and Women's Health Research, where she mentors undergrad students in applied and translational research in female physiology. And you just got back from the NSCA conference?
I did.
How was that, by the way? I did not go.
It was a lot of fun. It was my first time going to a national NSCA conference, but it was fun because, that's kind of more my scene. I've been in strength and conditioning for a long time and was a powerlifter, or I still am a powerlifter, but a powerlifting coach for a number of years before I retired last year, just to kind of focus on my academic profession and career trajectory. And so I know a lot of people that often go to NSCA or are involved in NSCA. So getting to meet people that I know more like online was a whole lot of fun. Getting to meet Antonella was a whole lot of fun. So yeah, we had a great time.
A competitive powerlift. Well, so tell me your numbers in what weight class are we talking?
I have competed because they've changed our weight classes a couple of times. But I compete in USAPL. So my first, the original weight class was 63 kilos, and then it went up to 67 and a half, and then back down to 65, I think. So just within that range.
That's strange.
I weigh in about 138 pounds. So that's always what I'm at. So whatever the weight class is at the moment that I compete, that's about what I weigh. My numbers before, so I have, I competed, and then I had my firstborn, then I got back to competing, and then had my second child, and I haven't competed since she was born yet. So my pregnancy with my second child's numbers was a 292 and a half squat and
that's pounds, not kilos.
Yes, I speak in pounds.
No, that's good, because I'm thinking most people will talk in kilos when they talk about.
I am absolutely terrible at kilos.
Yeah, I was thinking, wow, 292 kilos. Wow, you're one of the strongest women ever. So,
no, I know that would be amazing.
So what was your bench and dead?
My bench is my favorite. My bench press, in competition, I will say, in competition, my bench press was 187.5. Since then, while I was pregnant with my second born, I hit 195. So we need to get back on the platform and see what's there. And then my deadlift was 375 pounds.
Okay, well, this actually, it begs the question about, women and men training for powerlifting. I mean, in a way, it's just like track. It's a simple sport. In track, how fast can you run? In powerlifting, how much can you lift? So with the advent of more research on, I guess, female physiology vis-a-vis, are there differences within the menstrual cycle? Pragmatically, does it matter, since I guess a lot of women are amenorrheic who compete in athletics. So as far as predictions,
or on birth control.
What's that?
Or on birth control.
Or on birth control. So pragmatically, does it really matter? Because you still have to train, you still got to train the way you train for powerlifting, whether or not you're on birth control, whether or not you're amenorrheic, and the same applies really to any sport. So sort of give me your thoughts on that sort of big picture, because there's a lot of research coming out on this, and I would say most of the PhDs who are in this field, and this is kind of trying to cull all this information, they basically say it's nothing to worry about. And a lot of these are women who say there's nothing here, just train based on your goals. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. So where I come from is, I have been around a whole lot of females in a strength sport, whether they are on birth control, amenorrheic, or naturally menstruating. They do have more of this, kind of sports mindset where regardless of how they feel, they have to show up, and women are always going to show up. I will say, going through the process of my dissertation, when we were comparing fat oxidation between menstrual cycle phases, they were following a very traditional, like powerlifting workout between those two phases. And that was kind of on purpose. I wanted to see like what those differences were.
Now,
And, from a
I'm
metabolic.
sorry to interrupt. Before you expound on that further, a lot of people don't power lift. So explain what a typical
Sure.
powerlifting workout might be.
Yeah, so powerlifting is the sport of working up to a 1 rep max, typically in the back squat, the bench press, and deadlift. So, what I would mean by a traditional powerlifting workout is when you are performing those lifts very similarly to how you would perform them in competition. So, you typically would do the squat, then the bench, then the deadlift. And we worked at like not higher repetition, higher intensities, just kind of like a sub-max intensity because it wasn't with like solely power lifters. I had to take into account that while they were all well trained, they might not be following this specific type of program. But that being said, they were all doing 5 sets of 3 repetitions between 80 to 85% of their 1 rep max in those lifts. And we looked at it in the early follicular phase when you're strongest and in your mid luteal phase when you're not as strong, or you should be doing yoga and endurance.
Yoga.
And we didn't find a metabolic difference. That's what we were specifically looking at, but from more of just like that PI's point of view that's in there with all of these participants. If I had, and one of my regrets with that study is I should have taken a survey of just like subjective markers and like how they felt during those 2 sessions. We we stratified them between those trials. So some of them did their first session in the early follicular phase, some of them did their first session in the mid luteal phase. And regardless, it seemed that like the majority of those participants did feel worse in their mid luteal phase. They all kind of spoke to the effect that they were more tired, more fatigued. And I found that interesting because I have never been naturally menstruating. I've always been on birth control. So I don't really feel those naturally menstruating hormonal variation differences in performance. But regardless of how they felt, they were able to do the prescribed intensity just about the same. So I didn't see any differences. We didn't have any participants that were failing or unable to maintain that volume load that was prescribed. So speaking to the fact that like, are there differences? Should we train based on menstrual cycle? I personally don't think so. And I know there's a lot of nuance whenever it comes to this. And some people do feel worse during that mid to late luteal phase. But my perspective is if it's not one thing, it's another. Like you're going to have either that going on, you might have higher stress or tests going on in the early follicular phase that are going to make you feel fatigued or tired or worse.
Or you had
So
crappy
my
sleep or
perspective,
something. Yeah.
yeah, there's always something
Yeah.
that may affect it, may not. So, kind of my point of view is I'm a big advocate of auto regulating. I love RPE for those higher intensity, maybe top sets of your lifts, where you are working at like a difficulty that's really kind of geared towards how you're approaching that day, whether you've slept well or slept awful, whether you have a lot of like lifestyle stress or not, whether it's menstrual cycle related or not. Because that could be different throughout the entire menstrual cycle length. I don't think that
How,
it should solely be based, and I don't think you should make any predetermined changes,
mhm.
especially like if don't just go into it thinking, well, I'm in my mid-luteal phase, this session is going to suck. That's not necessarily true.
Explain, when I took biology many years ago, they had the stereotypical menstrual cycle of 28 days. And apparently it's never 28 days. So explain to the audience, the different phases, how long they are stereotypically supposed to last. And yeah, and so explain that, because a lot of people are not really up to date in terms of, how long each part of the cycle lasts.
Yeah, happy to. So typically we discuss two specific cycles. You have your follicular phase and your luteal phase, and they are separated by ovulation. And so what takes place within these specific phases, like the follicular phase, is when your menstrual cycle is starting. It's initiated by the menses, or the female's period. And so during that first component, not really half, but first phase of the menstrual cycle, it starts with these specific sex hormones being really low. So estrogen and progesterone, they're really what kind of keeps this cycle going. And the effects of this cycle is like developing a follicle, that egg bursting and releasing an egg, et cetera, et cetera. So these hormones are what we really associate these physiological and psychological changes that might be occurring. Estrogen and progesterone are low, and before you get to ovulation, which is when that follicle ruptures and an egg comes out, and if it's fertilized, you create a baby in that luteal phase. But before that, estrogen climbs really high, and that's what initiates ovulation. After that, whenever ovulation occurs, you reach that luteal phase. And that's when we see a climb in both estrogen and progesterone before it decreases leading into the next menstrual cycle. The length of it, yes, they typically say on average is 28 days. However, that varies between females, even between like months in the same female, because this cycle can be changed based on things like stress. And with that, a lot of them may have a shorter than 28 length menstrual cycle or a longer than 28 length. They typically say a normal menstrual cycle length is between 24 to 39 days. So it can drastically depend.
That's
In
quite a
my
range.
cohort, yeah, a very large range. And so I think that's important, because a lot of them are like, oh no, not
That's like
28 days.
measuring height, and it's like, well, he could be between 5'8" and 6'3". So
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'll throw this out there. I just have a lot of things that have collected in my brain of the course of this dissertation. A lot of like norms that I'm like, maybe this isn't all that normal. So like the menstrual cycle length could be different. My participants averaged 30 to 31 day menstrual cycle lengths, but I had someone who was all the way down at the bottom at 24. They also, like, if you look it up and look up like the perfect like menstrual cycle, it'll typically say that your follicular phase is like 14 to 18 days, and then your luteal phase is like typically 10 to 14 days. Totally like not the same. We had so much variance there as well. Your ovulatory phase, or like that ovulation, whenever that occurs, it's typically a 24 to 72, I think, hour length. That was way different between individuals, whether it would be like way earlier than the kits would indicate, or way later. So there was a lot that was different. Another one that I found, and I think we're kind of starting to see more evidence of this, especially with new technology. There's some things like urinary samples that usually are used for detecting ovulation for women who are trying to get pregnant. But now we're starting to use these same tools for tracking hormone levels between estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone. All of these things that are just associated with that menstrual cycle variance, but using them every day to actually get a more true picture of what those hormonal fluctuations look like. And if you look up a menstrual cycle figure, it'll be like estrogen, high estrogen, moderate estrogen, progesterone, low, high. And that is absolutely not what we're seeing when we actually measure women on a day-to-day basis. And I think that that's what makes it so hard to figure out really like when these phases specifically occur, when ovulation specifically occurs, that kind of thing.
Now, with regards to your powerlifting, this is sort of a sidebar question. Do you do any aerobic training when you're getting ready for a meet?
I do, and I've always been an advocate for having myself and my lifters supplement their training with some form of aerobic exercise. I oftentimes will um, put in like plyometric and like sprint training in my power lifters, kind of more far in advance, but then I'll also have them do whatever type of endurance training they like. So if they like running, if they like some other form of aerobic or cardiovascular exercise, we employ that. About 4 weeks out is when I typically am like, let's get highly specific. But up until that point, then I try and keep them to keep it in as much as possible. Even when we do get specific, I start to kind of amp up the accessory repetitions so that we can kind of maintain their fitness capacity the best that we can leading into that meet. But yeah, big
So
cardio.
it's starting at 4 weeks, are they doing steady state aerobic exercise, like go out
A
for
little
two
bit
to
of
three
both.
mile run?
Um, Again, it kind of depends on the person and what their preferences are. I'm not going to like make them do some sort of aerobic exercise that they're not going to adhere to or enjoy in some capacity. Even if it's just a really long walk, we'll employ something like that. So it really depends on the lifter and what their preferences are there.
So
Further out, the more that we use, the more closer we get to competition, we start to kind of be strategic about what they're using.
now what's the leading up to competition? I know, for instance, any weight class sport, particularly the fight sports, there's quite a drop in weight. I mean, for them to make weight, it's brutal. Is that something
Mhm.
similar in powerlifting?
We try not to.
Because
We
what would be the lower
oftentimes,
weight class for you? If what would be the next
um,
lower one?
for me
Yeah.
specifically, there was a 60 kilo weight class before whenever it changed from 63, it went to 60 and 67.5. I did the 60 for one competition and it was literally miserable. So I was like, I don't even
But you
care
made
anymore.
weight.
I'm
But
never
you
doing
made
that
weight,
again.
right?
I did, and I performed horrible.
Well,
It was only
okay.
a
From the
few
time you
kilos for
make
me.
weight till you compete, is there a day or the same day?
Not in USAPL, there's 2 hours.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Mm,
With a lot
so
of
that
fight
was
sports, you get to fight the next day, so they gain like
right.
20 pounds. Okay. So
Yeah. So
if,
there are federations that do it the day before, typically the night before. So that's probably not as bad. Mine was awful. And I will never forget that meet because I kind of dieted for a while. Then we had to, I was working with a nutrition coach that was like, okay, let's just like do keto for a couple weeks. Kill me now. That was terrible. I don't do well with that. Then I still wasn't dropping. I'm a tall power lifter. Like I'm not a
well,
tall person, but
yeah.
like for powerlifting, I'm tall. And already kind of relatively lean. So just dropping literally anything below about 135, 136 is truly impossible for me without killing myself with keto. And then like the last few days we dropped my sodium practically to zero for me
Oh
to be
my
able to
God.
weigh in. And I could not get I was so shaky. I couldn't get
But
enough nutrients in me after that to really
but
really
but
kind of
how did you
offset
do
how hard we
relative?
went.
How'd you do relative to the other lifters?
This is kind of funny. I am not tooting my own horn here. I'm just saying we need more power lifters in Alabama and probably the Panhandle. This was a meet in Pensacola, Florida. And yeah, I still won because I
So you were miserable, but
there's
you won.
small meets, I'm impressive. Big meets, I don't not even looked at.
Hey, I always tell people you don't choose who you compete against, you just show up and you
Yeah.
compete. right?
Exactly.
So you felt miserable. How about this? Feel miserable, win, or feel great and get second? Which would you take?
I'd rather, because for me, like, because I'm not the most competitive powerlifter and I recognize that, it's always about me beating my previous best. And so in that meet that I did poorly in, I either matched, and this was my first meet after my firstborn. So I was happy to match my lifts, and I wasn't leaving that place without matching my lifts. But so was able to match my deadlift, like a small 2.5 kilo PR on my squat. And then bench was another story. Those people claim that my butt left the bench, but it definitely didn't. I have video footage.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if it's videoed, you'd see it, right? I mean,
I know. I had a video that my dad later sent me, and I was like, I knew it didn't leave the bench. And so anyway, that effed me up. So I did not match or PR my bench press on that meet.
that's crazy. Let's talk a little bit about bodybuilding type training, hypertrophy training versus,
Yeah.
I mean, strength or power type training now. If you look at some of the older data going back to like 1970, 1980s, where I think it was Duncan McDougall, he looked at muscle fiber size in powerlifters and bodybuilders. And in general, powerlifters, they have hypertrophy or type 2 fibers, bodybuilders sort of hypertrophy and all the fiber types. But my thing with bodybuilders is that I always tell them, well, powerlifters get hypertrophy too. So even powerlifting, in a sense, is bodybuilding. It's just your
Mm-hmm.
goal is not really to look pretty. Your goal is to lift maximal weight. So is there really a difference physiologically, and this is related to, post-exercise lipid oxidation, between doing something like 8 to 12 reps versus, doing triples to 6 reps? I mean, is there a difference? And if there is, does it matter?
I think I don't know that evidence as well as you probably do, but coming from a history of both bodybuilding and powerlifting, and also being amongst that, probably like early 2010s or whatever, when power building was a big thing, and you kind of combined powerlifting and bodybuilding, I think that you can achieve similar physique goals with either or. I think what it really comes down to, and what we've really seen with hypertrophy training, is like working to fatigue. And so I often just kind of teach my students that, like, if your goal is to get stronger in these lifts, do them first and do them heavy. And then with your accessory lifts, like, you do them to fatigue, and you do them to just like some sort of level of difficulty, however you're kind of look at that, whether it's like you've got 2 reps left in the tank, RPE 8, whatever the case may be. You don't have to work to failure necessarily. But I've always looked at it in the sense of more real world application. Nobody is going to go in the gym and do like 1 to 3 sets of just failure of like a couple of exercises, which we
Actually,
oftentimes have to do.
it's funny
I
you
mean,
mentioned that. There are people who do that.
and I'm sure, if that works for you, if that's what you enjoy, at least you're lifting. Most of us are going to get really, really bored with that really, really fast. But my thing is, if we're doing like a lower body lift, then we're going to do, we're going to achieve or induce hypertrophy because we're using those muscles multiple times under resistance. Like, so I don't know. I think that you can absolutely have the physique with powerlifting, and with that being more of your focus, because most of the time powerlifters are doing, in some essence, like bodybuilding training. Like, we're doing other accessory exercises that bodybuilders would use for probably repetitions similar. So I've never, like, I mean, like I said, I come from a history of both bodybuilding and powerlifting, and even though powerlifting became, ever since like about 2016, my focus, my body's continued to change and morph along with that increased intensity and, volume over time. So
Are there
yeah,
any bodybuilding exercises that would be a complete waste of time for a powerlifter?
um, I don't
Curls,
think so. I
maybe?
think it's so dependent on the person and like what they need to improve, what things like might not feel good. Like, if they have some shoulder issues, probably don't care to use flies for them, but I enjoy flies. So, I think it's more specific to the person than in general. Give me an example. What's like a more traditional bodybuilding
How about
exercise?
preacher curls?
I love preacher curls. I mean, a lot,
How does that
and
help? How does that help
reason I like
powerlifting?
those. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of the times I feel like powerlifters may get into a habit of neglecting certain muscle groups as opposed to bodybuilders. And so having more of those isolation type exercises may be good in certain phases. Whenever it comes to little things like that, as a coach, I'm always more, I think a lot of things can get you to the same result, at least for the power lifter again. And so I oftentimes am like, what kind of bicep curls do you enjoy? Oh, I like preacher curls. Okay. I don't care.
Even if you don't win the meet, at least you would have pretty biceps.
True
So,
that.
so that's always a good thing.
It is.
Hey, tell the audience a little bit about this Fem Power or female exercise and metabolism for performance and women's health research. I will say this:
I'm sorry for the long
whenever people
acronym.
who came up with the acronym, because you should limit it to 3 to 4
Chat
letters.
GPT.
That's you.
Yeah, I was like, yo, Chat GPT, I want to have a cool name for my research team. This is what we research. Give me some ideas.
Oh my God. Well, it's a lot of letters.
It is. Yeah, everybody's like, you should just like drop it down to fem. And I'm like, but I like the power part because we oftentimes use the power lifts in it. So I was like, we're just gonna do fem power.
Power. Well, the power part's cool. I mean, performance,
And it
women's.
also is kind of like empower, but with the F on the front to indicate female.
M might be a better one. Empower. Tell-
Yeah.
when you
We
think
can
about
workshop
it,
it.
what are the acronyms that are memorable? They're all short. IRS,
Yes.
NBA, NFL,
Brief
ISSN,
point.
NSCA. I'm just giving you a hard time. Tell us
Okay.
about this research team you're leading and the goal and current projects you might be working on and future projects.
Yeah, oh my gosh. It's so funny because I just finished my PhD back in March, but I've been at Alabama since the fall of 2023. I came on board at Alabama before I finished my PhD, so I was like ABD. And so I did my dissertation there, and now that I've graduated, we'll just continue to work at UA. And so when I first got there, I was kind of like putting together my research team for when my dissertation studies would begin. And so I just had a number of undergraduate students who were really interested in my line of research. And as you mentioned earlier, like it really kind of comes down to I'm interested in strategies that are often used in strength and conditioning settings, but how do they apply to females? The one that you mentioned, post activation potentiation enhancement, and I do just say PAPE. I don't know if that's how you technically refer to it, but I say PAPE. This is whenever you combine a heavy resistance training exercise like the squat, and after the fact, you do some sort of power or explosive exercise, whether it is a jump variation or sprinting if you're doing the squat first, because it has to mimic that conditioning movement first. And so we've used this in strength and conditioning for a long time, but the real question is how much recovery time do you need between that heavy exercise and the power or explosive movement before you actually express greater power? And that's really the whole purpose of it. So we've looked at and we're continuing to look at PAPE in females to figure out a couple of different questions. One, how much recovery time is required for females? Because that might differ from males because we do tend to have a greater composition of type 1 fibers that have a greater volume, capacity, and fatigue threshold. So it might not take as long for females to recover before they express that power. And if you take too much recovery, you might just be back to baseline levels. So we're looking at that, but also if there's a difference between recreationally active females and athletically trained females. There was some evidence to suggest that strength levels may impact how much recovery time you need. And so that's where I was kind of coming from with the recreationally trained versus athletically trained. And so we've looked at that. We looked at accommodating resistance. That was my first PhD study. And so I was a big fan of accommodating resistance because I came from a history of conjugate powerlifting. So, like, do you know Louis Simmons and all that fun?
Yes, yes.
So I was a big conjugate power lifter, and I was interested to kind of replicate Dr. Matthew Ray, his research on accommodating resistance, but in females to see if there were any advantages to it. And there might be a small advantage, but I think we need to look at it in more trained females versus like more recreationally trained, I guess you could say. So we did a little bit of that. And then really like where my more, I guess, clinical side, where we look at resistance training and strength training on cardiometabolic responses in females, is I really want to see how what we're doing now, how strength training in this like nice little premenopausal phase of our life cycle is going to impact females in the long term. And so that's where my dissertation really came in and why we looked at fat oxidation post resistance training. It was really kind of to open the door of if it improves fat oxidation post exercise for however long in well trained premenopausal women, does that beg the question of if it's going to be an effective strategy for perimenopausal women and postmenopausal women or females with PCOS, things of that nature. So we do have, that's where now that I've finished my PhD, where I'm taking it next. And so I have like a kind of a side team of our FemPower team who's focusing now on putting together a survey for perimenopausal women to kind of see if there's any symptom differences between those who are well trained and what type of training they're doing and those who are not training. And then from there, we'll kind of probably take it more this route to actually measure metabolic responses from resistance training and
Are you going to
perimenopausal.
look at any use of dietary supplements in this population?
I would love to. I would need to bring like Antonella or you on because that's not so much my area of expertise. So having someone else kind of come on board to give an idea of why or what might actually impact them in the long run and yeah, look at it further. It'd be a lot of fun. I think
Yeah.
that there's a lot to tap into within this population.
Oh yeah, there's I mean there are umpteen studies you could do
I know.
in that
So many.
population. So
I know.
yeah, it's sort of like how much time do you have during the day, and that
I
really
know.
determine,
How many
yeah.
doc students do you have that need a dissertation study?
No, you're gonna have to get a bunch of undergrads to help you get a whole team of
No, for real.
yeah.
One of the funny things about my dissertation is like it was extremely long hours and very very early mornings. Like oftentimes I had to be up at like 2:30 in the morning for these trials. It was ridiculous. And so whenever you're in your defense and they're like, so where do you want to take this next? And I'm like, I have ideas, but I'm not doing it without a team like students who are going to do it because I'm never waking up that early again if I can help it.